Welcome back to the deep dive. When you look at a huge, polished Renaissance masterpiece, like a fresco or a perfect marble statue, you probably think the sketches beforehand were, well, just workshop scraps. Disposable.
And for a long time, they kind of were. We're diving into some really fascinating sources today, leaning heavily on graphics, especially from the amazing Hermitage collection, to trace this incredible journey, how drawing, Disegno, went from something you literally wipe off a board to, well, a celebrated art form in its own right.
It's a real paradox, isn't it? How did the stuff meant for the bin become this, ultimate insight into the artist's genius?
Exactly.
Let's start with the official story, maybe. From Giorgio Vasari, the father of art history. He famously called Disegno the father of three arts: architecture, sculpture, painting.
Right.
And he framed it less as just sketching and more as this intellectual thing, the pure idea behind the artwork.
It's a beautiful way to put it, almost philosophical. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Vasari was writing the mid-16th century, looking back. He was summarizing a concept that really only took shape during his time. Before that, say in the 15th century. The reality on the ground was much, much more basic. Drawing wasn't this high-minded concept yet. It was, well, purely practical.
So if 15th century artists weren't thinking about these grand ideas in their drawings, what were they drawing? Our sources point to, two main kinds, almost opposites, existing side by side.
That's right. First, you had what you might call the expensive object. Something meant to be finished, kept, admired.
Not really a sketch, then.
No, not at all. These are incredibly detailed pieces, often in full color, really trying to mimic painting techniques, but done on fancy, expensive materials. Designed to last, designed to impress. Not really preparatory in the way we think of it.
Like those miniatures by Francesco Pesolino, the ones from the Punica Codex.
Exactly. Those 6 compositions. If you see images, the colors are just astonishingly bright, almost like modern highlighters.
Yeah.
And done on parchment or vellum, super expensive, with gold lines. True luxury items.
And the story is how they got to Russia. That says a lot about their value, right?
Oh, absolutely. It speaks volumes. When the Codex was moved from a monastery library in Venice, late 18th century, someone apparently just cut the leaves out.
Wow.
And this Russian diplomat, Alexander Martinov, he just snapped them up immediately, sent them off to Russia before the locals could even react. It was basically, high-stakes art acquisition, maybe bordering on, let's call it opportunistic collecting.
They were clearly seen as portable treasures. And visually, it's interesting too, isn't it? Pesolino is illustrating an ancient Roman poem. But the style...
It's Gothic.
Yeah.
Yeah, the heroes have armor covered in gold patterns, looking more like medieval knights in fancy coats than Roman soldiers.
Yeah.
It really shows the early Renaissance still figuring out how to visualize that classical past they admired.
Okay, so that's the precious finished drawing. What about the everyday stuff, the working drawings in the studio?
That's the other extreme, the cheap, the disposable study, the stuff that was meant to disappear.
Which is why we don't have tons of the earliest examples, I guess.
Precisely. We know from Cennino Cennini's book, back in the 14th century, that standard practice was drawing on wooden tablets, covered in a fine dust like ash or ground bone.
So you could just wipe it clean.
Yep. Make a mistake. Don't need it anymore. Just smooth the dust out and start again. Great for saving resources, terrible for art history. We lost so much.
Yeah, no kidding. So when did that change?
The big game changer was paper arriving in Italy around the mid-15th century. Paper hit that sweet spot, cheaper than parchment, way cheaper. But unlike the dusty boards, you could actually keep it. You could archive it.
The power of paper.
And then you have the architect Alberti actually advising artists, hey, use big sheets of paper for your detailed studies. That's a major shift in thinking. Suddenly you can hold on to your ideas, your experiments.
So Alberti basically invented the artist's backup drive.
You could say that. Paper offered this fantastic field for experiments. Artists could try things out, make mistakes, keep the studies, the sketches, the skizzy. They could build an archive.
And you start seeing more of these studies survive then.
Oh yeah, an explosion of material. Take Filipino Lippi's workshop. We see lots of drapery studies. Artists would just draw rows and rows of figures, draped or nude, just practicing folds, poses, things they could use later.
And the paper itself influenced the look, didn't it? You mentioned it wasn't great quality at first.
Right. Early paper could be pretty rough, flimsy stuff. So artists often had to ground it, prepare the surface, often with like an orangish or colored base.
Why do that?
To give it somebody, basically turn the flimsy sheet into a more stable, board-like surface to draw on. And this technical fix had a huge aesthetic impact.
How so?
Well, instead of drawing lines that seem to create depth into white paper, the figures are built up from that colored ground, usually with silver point and white highlights, the bile. It gives the drawings this slightly archaic, flatter look, more like icons, powerful shapes on the surface, rather than figures receding into space.
That's fascinating. The material itself shapes the style. And these studies weren't just for inventing things, right? Learning was key. Copying antiques.
Absolutely essential. Copying ancient sculptures, reliefs. And the sources have this great story about a copy that went, well, a bit wrong.
Oh, do tell.
Okay, so there's this famous ancient carved gem, the Medicean gem, showing young Heracles wearing the Nemean lion skin. An artist copies it, but somehow misinterprets it, maybe didn't know the story that well,
Wow.
and draws the figure as Omphale, Queen of Lydia, who also sometimes wore a lion skin in mythology after enslaving Heracles. So Heracles gets drawn as a woman, essentially, a case of mistaken identity.
Right. Seriously, a simple mistake copying a tiny gem actually influenced how later famous artists drew women.
It seems so.
Yeah.
This particular misinterpretation seems to have filtered through workshop copies. You can see echoes of that specific pose or drapery style, originally meant for Heracles, appearing the way women are depicted later, maybe even influencing artists like Botticelli, one little drawing error having huge downstream effects.
That's incredible. Talk about the butterfly effect in art. And how did workshops make sure students learned consistently? Like, how did they practice drawing the same complex folds over and over?
Ah, well, they had a system for that too. Mannequins. Not like store mannequins today, more like small figures or just pieces of cloth dipped in plaster.
Plaster. Why?
So they could arrange the drapery into really complex specific folds, let the plaster harden, and then preserve that exact arrangement. It became a permanent model.
Ah, clever.
Then multiple students could sit and draw that exact same set of folds, studying how the light hit it, how the shadows fell. We actually have drawings by Leonardo da Vinci from the Uffizi showing he copied one specific mannequin setup.
No way.
And remarkably, drawings of the very same plaster drapery setup have been found that came from Ghirlandaio's workshop. It proves they had these standardized, reusable teaching tools, a shared curriculum, basically, for mastering form.
Okay, so by the end of the 15th century, drawing is this vital workshop tool. It's used for practice, for copying, it's archivable thanks to paper, but it's still mostly preparatory.
Largely, yes. But then comes the early 16th century, and boom, everything changes. This is the moment drawing really steps into the spotlight. And it's thanks to two legendary unfinished projects.
The Non Veneti. You must mean Leonardo's Battle of Angari and Michelangelo's Battle of Cassina?
Exactly. These massive frescoes were commissioned around the same time, 1503, 1506, for the big council hall in Florence, the Hall of 500. Huge, prestigious commissions.
But neither got finished. Leonardo's experimental technique failed.
Catastrophically failed, yeah. And Michelangelo. He completed the cartone, the full-size preparatory drawing, but then Pope Julius II called him to Rome, and he never actually painted the fresco.
So the final paintings never really existed in a finished state, but the
Yeah.
drawings.
The cartoni became instantly legendary. This is the key moment. They effectively legitimized drawing, Disegno, as having its own powerful, expressive language, completely separate from the finished painting.
And Vasari jumps back in here, right? But this time describing something happening in his own era.
Yes, and his description of Michelangelo's Battle of Cassina cartoon is electric. He talks about its, quote, divine quality. He raves about the incredible variety of techniques Michelangelo used: charcoal, intricate hatching, ink washes, white highlights, all on this massive paper surface.
And crucially,
He specifically notes that artists, young and old, flocked to Florence for years just to stand there and copy the drawing. The cartoon itself became the destination, the masterpiece.
that's just mind-blowing when you think about it. The most talked about influential piece of art in Florence at that moment wasn't a painting or a sculpture. It was a giant, unfinished drawing.
Precisely. Because Michelangelo made it, this incredibly skillful, dynamic, but technically unfinished drawing was suddenly seen as enough, as complete art in itself. The preparatory stage had achieved the status of a final work.
So the best art in town was literally a work in progress.
Kind of, yeah. And Leonardo, around the same time, was writing about composition, giving this idea theoretical weight. He advised artists to start rough, focus on the movement, the soul conditions of figures first.
Didn't he say something about seeing ideas in random patterns?
He did. He encouraged artists to look at their initial messy sketches, almost like you'd see shapes in clouds or, stains on a wall. Find inspiration in the spontaneous mark. He argued that this freedom, this lack of finish, is where the real invention happens. The imperfect line holds the perfect idea.
Okay, so drawing, Disegno, has now gained this intellectual respect, this aesthetic independence. How does this new status get out into the world? How does it spread beyond Florence or Rome?
One word, printmaking. This is the accelerator. Engravings, etchings, vanzas, you actually call them disegni stampati, printed drawings.
Ah, interesting connection.
And prints were, remember, the only way back then to mass reproduce an image.
Yeah.
So they become absolutely critical for spreading this new Florentine Roman ideal of drawing across Europe.
Enter Raphael, the master
Oh,
strategist.
totally. Raphael was brilliant at this. He didn't really engrave himself, not much anyway. But he set up a dedicated workshop run by his student Baviera, specifically to turn his drawings into prints.
So he was basically figuring out brand management and IP monetization, 16th century style.
Pretty much. Initially, it was probably practical share ideas, maybe make some money.
Yeah.
But he quickly realized he could design images specifically for print. Images that would serve as a kind of visual textbook for other artists everywhere.
Like the Massacre of the Innocents print.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a horrifying biblical scene. But look at it from an artist's perspective. It's a masterclass in depicting bodies in motion, male figures, female figures, children, all in dramatic poses, showing off anatomical knowledge.
Which is why the soldiers are often shown nude, right? Even though that's not historically accurate.
Exactly. It's a convention for artistic study, showing the musculature, the form. The print functions perfectly as a portable lesson in anatomy and composition. Raphael deliberately used prints to become the model artist, the reference point for generations.
His prints became the artistic software everyone else ran. But what's really wild is when the print, based on a drawing, becomes more famous or influential than the actual finished artwork.
Yes. The classic case is Raphael's Parnassus fresco in the Vatican.
The one with Apollo and the muses on the mountain.
That's the one. The main engraver working with Raphael, Marcantonio Raimondi, made a very famous print of it. But, and this is crucial, he based the engraving on one of Raphael's early preparatory drawings, not the final fresco painted on the wall.
How different were they?
Significantly, the drawing, and therefore the print, is rectangular. The fresco is semicircular to fit over a window. The arrangement of some muses is different, the instruments they hold. Lots of changes were made for the final painting.
But the print showed the earlier version.
Right, and that print, based on the initial drawing, became the standard image of Parnassus known throughout Europe. Even later artists like Poussin, a French painter living in Rome, who could literally walk over and see the final fresco in the Vatican.
Let me guess, he based his own paintings on the print.
He did. He preferred the composition in the print, the one derived from Raphael's initial drawing. It shows how much authority the drawing, disseminated via print, could have, sometimes even more than the finished monumental work itself.
Wow. The sketch takes precedence. Which brings us, I think, to the final stage in this evolution, where drawing becomes fully autonomous.
Exactly. And the key figure here is Parmigianino, working in the mid-16th century during the Mannerist period.
He was known for being an obsessive draftsman,
It was
right?
tireless. It said painting almost seemed too slow, too cumbersome for him compared to the immediacy of drawing. His drawings are fascinating, often quite chaotic, layers upon layers of lines, almost like automatic writing sometimes.
Not always connected to a specific painting project.
Often not. Just explorations of form, ideas jotted down, seemingly plotless sketches. But here's the thing. Collectors, even then, highly value these drawings precisely because of that immediacy, that raw, unfinished quality. That's a huge step, valuing the drawing purely for itself.
And he wanted to reproduce this feeling, this look.
Yes, but he ran into a problem. Professional engravers, with their very precise, methodical techniques, just couldn't capture the light, spontaneous, almost nervous energy of his drawing style. Their polished lines killed the vibe.
So what did he do?
He took control. He basically rejected collaboration and taught himself etching aquaforte, or a fort.
Etching. That's different from engraving, right? Easier for a draftsman.
Much easier technically. Engraving involves physically carving lines into metal, which requires a lot of skill and strength. Etching involves drawing with a needle through a soft wax coating on the plate. Then acid bites the lines into the metal. It's much closer to the feeling of drawing freely on paper.
So he could translate his drawing style directly into a printable format.
Precisely. His etchings deliberately preserve the aesthetic of the drawing. They embrace the unfinished look, the freedom, the suggestive line, even lines that might be technically incorrect from a purely anatomical standpoint. They feel atmospheric, visionary, personal.
And by doing that,
By moving the aesthetic of the spontaneous, free, suggestive drawing into the reproducible, finished medium of the print, Parmigianino basically confirmed drawing's status. It wasn't just preparatory anymore. It was a complete independent art form with its own unique language and its own intrinsic value.
What a journey. So we've gone from basically dust on a board
Right, from Cennini's ash-covered tablets.
through Pesolino's jewel-like miniatures, then the game-changing cartoni of Leonardo and Michelangelo that made the unfinished drawing a masterpiece.
Spread globally by Raphael's strategic use of prints.
And finally solidified by Parmigianino capturing the very soul of the sketch in his etchings.
It really is remarkable evolution, seeing how value and perception shifted so dramatically over about 150 years.
And it brings us back maybe to Leonardo's idea about the viewer completing the image, that idea of seeing things in clouds or stains.
Yeah, that profound thought that the power of the sketch, the suggestive line, is that it invites you, the viewer, to participate, to mentally project, to finish the form, to engage with the artist's initial thought.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. If the real core of the artwork, the idea Vasari talked about, that first flash of genius, truly lives in the spontaneity and suggestion of the drawing, does the final polished painting or sculpture ever fully capture that initial spark?
Or is the drawing, in its beautiful imperfection maybe, the truest version of the art? Something to think about next time you see a Renaissance sketch.